And as we've been telling you, this wraps up the first week of testimony in the trial that's gripped the nation for days now. And here with me now to discuss more is attorney Jim DeSimone. Welcome to BNC Live.
Thank you very much, Laverne. Good to see you.
Good to see you also. So I want to talk about the way the session ended today, testimony from the longest serving officer in the Minneapolis Police Department. Tell us about why this is a critical point for both the prosecution and the defense.
Well, it's extremely powerful because you do have law enforcement and the highly placed law enforcement within Minneapolis Police Department saying this goes against our training. And folks were wondering, well, how does this get in? How do these opinions, how is the judge making this admissible? And it's really because of one of Derek Chauvin's defense. He's claiming that this is within training, that the knee on the neck was permissible in order to restrain someone. It's a bogus defense. I mean, for years, as Lieutenant Zimmerman and David, the Sergeant Pluger confirmed, we have known that positional asphyxiation will occur when you lie someone prone down on the ground with their legs tied and their hands handcuffed behind their back. You don't do it. You put them on their side, they sit them up. Compound that with the knee on the neck here, and you have a recipe for disaster and death so that it was predictable. And what the jury is seeing is that even if you take into account some training videos that they're going to bring up later in the trial, what was facing the officers at this point in time was an individual who was handcuffed, non threatening, not in a position to hurt them, pleading for his life, and there was no need to use what has now been confirmed as deadly force. That knee on the neck is deadly force, and it killed George Floyd.
Jim, people often wonder about how these things work and whether or not there are backdoor deals made or whether there are sort of gentleman deals made. Is it possible that the police force there in Minneapolis said, there's no way we can withstand this? Let's just do what we got to do, and he's got to take the fall for this because we're all going to be under scrutiny. Because obviously, people are going to be looking at whether or not they have proper laws and whether or not they're using force excessively or not in the rest of the police force. Is it possible that they could have made some sort of deal and said, there's no way we can fight this. We can't protect one of our own. We can't do this. We just have to say that, this is not part of our practice, and he just takes the fall?
Well, it could have been a deal, and it could have just been a common sense way to have peace within their city. Because, of course, shortly after the video went viral here in Minneapolis, we had the protests. We had what we had in terms of what had been described as riots. But the vast majority of people, both in Minneapolis and across the country, were peacefully protesting because of the fact that when you watch that video, this is not a situation where it was a split second decision by a police officer that resulted in someone's death. This was calculated. This was ignoring the totality of the circumstances of the lack of threat of George Floyd. So I think, in some respects, they just could not defend the indefensible. You cannot defend placing a knee on the neck of someone who is handcuffed and restrained. I mean, as they confirmed today, there's really not a lot that someone can do when they're in handcuffs to actually hurt you. Yeah, they could kick or something like that. They could spit, but they're not going to be able to use the type of force that would justify deadly force. So I think the city and its police officers are doing the right thing, and I don't know that they had. Well, I won't say they didn't have a whole lot of choice because police agencies all the time defend the indefensible sometimes. But in this instance, they are doing the right thing by bringing their command staff in and saying that this violated policy.
Yeah, and I only say that because we all remember what happened with Breonna Taylor in Kentucky. She was in her apartment, of course, and was shot and killed by officers who went to the wrong apartment. A different situation, but still, there were, those officers did not suffer charges and from that case. So that's why I ask about this case because, there are people who've been nervous that Derek Chauvin will not be charged or will not be convicted, rather. He will not be convicted of anything. So I want to go back to now the other witnesses that we heard from, the clerks, the other people who have taken the stand this week. It's been emotional. what would you say? What do you think the jurors are thinking right now? They've heard from all these different people, even some minors. What do you think stands out if you're a juror in this case?
Well, it's interesting that in the opening statements, the defense emphasized using common sense. And really, when you look at the whole aspect of common sense here, I think that what the jurors take away here is that everyone who watched this situation from the outside, from the dispatcher who is looking at the video and calls the sergeant, a police dispatcher calling the police on the police, from a 9-year-old girl, from a female firefighter, a male who had the experience in martial arts. Everyone who looked at that bouquet of humanity that was described in opening statement come and say there is something wrong here. This is not proper when someone's not moving to keep that pressure on the neck. So I think that what you have here is you have emotion of watching a man die in front of your eyes on this video, but the emotion is aligning with the facts in terms of this is not good police work. The emphasis of Lieutenant Zimmerman of when you have someone in that condition, you're not using force against them. You're sitting them up. You're calming them down. You're providing medical care if necessary. That's how police officers are trained. So that Derek Chauvin is going against all of his training. So you have the facts and emotion aligned, and now we're going to see in the rest of the trial, or what will be coming up, does the science align? Is the cause of George Floyd's death, was it the lack of oxygen to his brain which caused his heart to stop? And the overwhelming evidence says yes, the drugs are a distraction. They're what we call a red herring. Wished it hadn't happened. The drugs just made him more vulnerable, but they didn't kill him. It was the knee to the neck, the positional asphyxiation, the pressure on his back that killed George Floyd. And I know we're all a little nervous that justice won't be had. We've been disappointed so many times in other cases in recent history, and even going back 30 years here in Los Angeles with Rodney King, the initial verdict in Simi Valley. But I do feel that given the evidence and the way the prosecution is handling this case, that we're going to have a conviction, and we're going to have a conviction for murder.
Well, that's quite a prediction there, Jim, and many people are certainly hoping that you are right on that. Thank you so much for your analysis and your thoughts today. We appreciate you taking time to join us here on BNC Live.